The Peter Schiff Show. Today's podcast is sponsored by NetSuite, the easy-to-use cloud-based business management software for every aspect of your business. By popular demand, NetSuite has extended its one-of-a-kind flexible finance program for a few more weeks. Head to netsuite.com/gold. Well, it's good to be back in the Puerto Rico studio. I flew back down from Connecticut earlier today, back from my extended summer vacation. You know, I got two young kids here that start school in the morning. So it's a brand new school year here in Puerto Rico, and I'm in the studio. And we're going to be doing some more work on the studio. As a matter of fact, I just noticed we got this new podcast desk that's sitting in the garage here in Puerto Rico. So as soon as we have a chance to set that up, we'll be, having a nicer, newer studio. Hopefully, we can also get rid of some of the bugs in the equipment here. But anyway, so there's been a lot of action in the markets since my last podcast. I mean, a lot of movement. We actually didn't change very much from where we were, but there was a lot of volatility between last Friday and the Friday just passed that week. And if you recall, I titled my Friday podcast, Will the Fed Have an Emergency Rate Cut to Avert a Crash? And the reason I thought that there may be an emergency cut or calls for an emergency cut was because I saw the makings of a market crash. I saw the way the stock market reacted to the Friday jobs report, which was a weak jobs number. But instead of the market rallying on bad news is good news, the market sold off. Because to me, what that was saying to the market was the Fed waited too long and we're having a recession. It was a horrible jobs report. I don't need to go over it again. I went over it in detail on the last podcast. But my concern was, or my thought was, that this is a bad sign that the markets are selling off on weak economic data. So it looked to me like the markets were starting to price out the soft landing. And I had noticed for the past couple of weeks the rotation that continued this week, although not as pronounced, but it did continue, where people were moving out of growth into defensive value names, preparing for a weaker economy. And I also noticed what was happening in Japan, where the yen was very strong and the Japanese market was starting to roll over. It had a very weak day on Friday in Japan. So Thursday night, our time, and then we woke up and we had a bad day. But given what was going on in Japan, and I thought that there could have been a big drop in Japan when they reopened for trading on Monday, especially since the yen rallied even more during our time zone on Friday. So I thought, okay, we could get some big drop in the market coming, and that's going to cause calls for an emergency rate cut. And I thought we might even get one. And I thought that the Fed missed the opportunity. As I suggested, they should have cut rates last week on the Wednesday when they met. Now, again, they shouldn't cut rates at all. They should never have stopped raising rates. Rates are still too low. So when I'm talking about what they should have done, it's not what they should have done if they're actually trying to do the right thing and help the economy. Because the right thing is to raise rates more and let the chips fall where they may. Sure, stocks are going to crash. Real estate's going to crash. We're going to have a hard landing. It's going to be a recession. But unfortunately, that's what we need. Not because it's fun, but because it's necessary. Now, if you don't want to have this necessary crash, then the Fed never should have made that deal with the devil. Because the devil's going to come to collect eventually. They never should have cut rates to zero. They never should have done quantitative easing, because the minute they did that, the collapse is inevitable. You can't avoid it. Now, you can succeed in delaying it, which they've been doing now for more than a decade, but the longer you delay it, the worse it is, right? Nothing's for free. It's all a trade-off. So if you don't want the pain today, you want the pain tomorrow, well, it's going to be much more excruciating pain, right? So pain now or worse pain later. Unfortunately, the politicians, the central bankers always opt for more pain later because it's later. And so that's less painful for them politically, even though it's more painful for the nation economically. So when I'm talking about the Fed cutting rates, it's just because I understand what they're trying to accomplish. And given where we were, it should have been obvious to Powell and his cronies over at the Fed that the economy is in recession or rapidly approaching recession. The labor market has rolled over, and they should have cut rates if their goal was to kick the can down the road a little longer and try to prop stuff up. But they didn't do it. And I knew that on the Friday I recorded my podcast. And I said, they didn't cut rates. They're continuing to say they're data dependent. They're not sure what they're going to do. I knew the markets weren't going to like that, given the fact that they've obviously already waited too long when it comes to averting a recession. And so I thought we might get this crash. And sure enough, it started on Sunday night. I think the Nikkei was down 14 or 15% almost on the lows. I think it closed down about 12%, but it was down almost 6% on the prior Friday. So the drop from in one weekend, really, or two trading days, Friday to Monday, we had a 20% drop. That's an entire bear market in the entire Nikkei in two trading days. In fact, the decline on that Monday was bigger than the decline on Black Monday or the day following, because I guess Japan reacted to our crash on Black Monday 1987 on Tuesday, right? Because they reacted. But the decline that Japan had on Monday, this past Monday, was worse than that. So it was like the worst day. I don't know when, they had a worse day in Japan than that. And so the U.S. markets were selling off in sympathy. Sunday night, I think Dow futures were down almost 1,000, maybe 1,000 points. And NASDAQ was down even more. I think at the lows, I saw the NASDAQ futures down about 6%. Bitcoin was completely collapsing. In fact, it almost got to 50,000. It got down to about 52, 53,000. And then later on, I think early before our market opened, Bitcoin actually went below 50,000. It was just at 74,000. That was the nominal record high in dollars. And here we are. Ether got killed even more. Ether, which was at about 3,100 on Friday, got to 2,100. It dropped 1,000, like a third of its value in one night. Ethereum, right? They just launched those ETFs 2 years ago. People are getting killed who bought those things. So all the risk assets were getting killed. Gold was initially up. It wasn't up a lot. I saw it go up maybe 15, 20 bucks, but gold didn't make a new high. And I think that created a problem because when the U.S. markets opened on Monday, gold sold off, and on its lows, it was down 80 bucks. Rallied back, ended up closing down about 40 bucks on the day. The markets rallied back. The Dow was only down about 600 points, I think. By the time they rang the bell, all the markets recovered. They were still lower, but they recovered. Now, early that morning, so many people were coming on CNBC calling for, hey, we need an emergency rate cut. The Fed got it wrong. We need to cut. So what I was saying was going to happen the Friday before the weekend was happening on that Monday. Now, the Feds didn't come through, but I think because the markets recovered, they felt that they probably didn't have to. And one of the reasons for the recovery was yields, short yields collapsed, and the markets began to price in a near 100% probability that we would get a cut in September of 50 basis points, not even 25 basis points. Powell brushed that off at the last press conference. But I said on my podcast that if we didn't get the emergency rate cut, we were getting a cut for sure in September. I just thought they may not even wait until September. They may have to do it sooner, and they still might, because we still have a long time between that September meeting and right now. But because the bond market started to price that in and rates went down, that helped the markets, because the markets saw this and they're like, okay, the Fed is definitely going to cut now. We no longer have that uncertainty of it's data dependent. The market now realizes that the Fed is going to move on in September no matter what. And that, I think, that helped the market psychology. The market started to anticipate, okay, we dodged a bullet here. We didn't get the rate cut uh, in July, but it's a done deal for September, so we can stop worrying about it. Now, of course, Powell would have looked a lot more prescient if he had done what I advised. Remember, on my last podcast before the Fed meeting, I said that I thought the Fed should have cut in July based on the economic data. Again, not because it's the right thing to do, but because I know what the Fed is trying to do. And I can see that the economy was weak enough that they could try to get away with a rate cut. And they can claim that, well, inflation is going to keep falling. Well, we've got to be concerned about the employment market, the economy. They missed that opportunity. But then when they did, I said, look, we're going to get a cut in September at the latest if we don't get an emergency cut before that time. So that helped the market recover. Everything recovered. Bitcoin recovered. Of course, it didn't recover everything, but it recovered. And then the markets pretty much rallied all week long, so that by the end of the week, you barely knew that we had that crash. In fact, the Dow was down on the week only about 0.5%, maybe a little bit more than that. S&P was practically unchanged. In fact, I forget, it was down a little, up a little, but it was almost unchanged. The NASDAQ was down, I think, 0.2, 0.2% after being killed, right, on Monday morning. And some of the big tech names were just getting decimated, but they immediately bought the dip on Monday. The Russell 2000 was down about 1.4%, I think. Gold ended up settling down about $7 or $8 on the week. After all that volatility, it only closed down $7 or $8 on the week. The gold stocks, though, they got hit a bit. They were down 2% on the week, but they got shellacked on Monday. It was a great buying opportunity in those gold stocks on Monday. In fact, I posted that on my X account. Oh, and by the way, on the Sunday night, with all the carnage going on, I decided to have this impromptu spaces on X. And I ended up doing it for like 5 hours. I was up till 2 in the morning. I started at 9 o'clock at night, and I had to hang up because I still had over 2,000 people like queued up trying to ask me questions. The whole thing ended up kind of getting captured by the Bitcoin, because almost everything was Bitcoin. Of course, Bitcoin was crashing as I was doing this. In fact, Bitcoin ended up on the week. Bitcoin, the ETFs now, look at the ETFs, were down 7% on the week. But they closed 18% above their low for the week. Still down 7%, but 18% off the lows. Ether was even worse. Ether was down 14% on the week, but 19% above its low for the week. But if you think about where Ether went in 2 weeks, from the high to the low, it had a 38% drop. No, that is the ETFs. The actual Ether went down even more than the ETFs, because Ether had recovered somewhat by the time the ETFs, started to trade. But they were down almost 40% in 2 weeks. They've only been public for 2 weeks. People bought them for the first time 2 weeks ago and down almost 40%. Actually, it was not even 2 weeks. It was down 40% almost in 1 week and a day, right, from Monday morning. Now, it recovered, but this whole big drop was a big topic of the spaces. By the way, shows you the shills on CNBC. When they were talking about this, right, they're looking on their screens, and it says Bitcoin is down like 13%, and the ETFs are down 18% pre-market. I forget the exact amount. And they're looking at this and they're saying, oh, I guess there's an arbitrage opportunity here. People can arbitrage. There's no arbitrage. These guys are shilling this stuff nonstop, and they don't even understand it. Joe Kernan didn't understand it. He was talking about this arbitrage opportunity. What they don't seem to understand on CNBC is Bitcoin trades on Saturday and Sunday. And so when they're showing the daily decline, it's a 24-hour decline. Bitcoin was down a lot on Saturday and then down even more on Sunday. And so the ETFs had to price in the entire weekend decline. So when they're showing, oh, Bitcoin is down 13%, no, that's in 24 hours. Since the Friday close, it was down like 18%. They didn't seem to get that, but they always kind of sugarcoat the degree of a weekend drop if the drop happens on both Saturday and Sunday. But in any event, so there was a lot of Bitcoin people on this spaces that I did. So the next time I'll try to minimize the Bitcoin chat. I know all you Bitcoin guys are going to try to win me over, convert me and get me to embrace Bitcoin. It's not going to work, but it's not like I'm closed-minded. I mean, I'm open-minded, but I'm also intelligent and honest and understand it. And so, I still haven't heard anything to persuade me that I'm wrong. And the volatility over this weekend, right? When Bitcoin could crash right below 50,000, when everything was going down, Bitcoin went down the most. And they're trying to get the government to have a Bitcoin reserve. You can't have a reserve asset that's the most volatile asset. The reserve asset is the one you're supposed to rely on. When everything else is selling off, you could use that reserve asset. But how could you use a reserve asset that goes down even more than the stuff you're trying to hedge? So it's all a bunch of nonsense. Anyway, I'm going to take a commercial break. I got a lot more to talk about in the podcast, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Here's some quick math. The less your business spends on operations, on multiple systems, on delivering your products or services, the more margin you have and the more money you keep. But with higher expenses on materials, employees, distribution, and borrowing, everything costs more. So to reduce costs and headaches, smart businesses are graduating to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one platform and one source of truth. With NetSuite, you'll reduce IT costs because NetSuite lives in the cloud with no hardware requirement, access from anywhere. You cut the cost of maintaining multiple systems because you've got one unified business management suite. You improve efficiency by bringing all major business processes into one platform, slashing manual tasks and errors. Over 37,000 companies have already made the move. So do the math. See how you'll profit with NetSuite. By popular demand, NetSuite has extended its one-of-a-kind flexible finance program for a few more weeks. Head to netsuite.com/gold.
Now, I was talking on my last podcast, and even on my Spaces, my X Spaces conversation, about the potential of the Federal Reserve, saving the market. Well, I should have been talking about the Bank of Japan saving the market, because that's what happened. The main reason that we had this big recovery during the week was the Bank of Japan. Now, the Japanese stocks on their own recovered on Tuesday. So Tuesday was an up day in Japan. And part of that might have been the way we turned around on Monday. When Japan opened, the U.S. stock market was a lot higher than it was trading at when Japan closed. So I think the fact that, we didn't collapse and our interest rates, we had a big drop in rates as the market started to price in this 100% probability of a September cut. And by the way, they priced in a lot more cuts, between now and the end of the year. So everybody is thinking the Fed has got to rapidly kind of catch up with a bunch of cuts. And so Japan rallied. But then what happened the very next night, because Japan probably would have rolled over. That was probably like a dead cat bounce. We had a big drop Friday and Monday. You get a reversal Tuesday. You get a turnaround Tuesday, normally a meaningless type rally. And the Nikkei probably would have resumed its descent and maybe made new lows, which would have, impacted our markets, but for the Bank of Japan, which came to the rescue. Now, they didn't have an emergency rate cut, but they had an emergency announcement that they're going to stop hiking. They just started hiking. They're at 25 basis points, right? They're barely above zero after having been there for 2 decades. They were negative for I don't know how many years. And so they came out with an announcement, and they said that there will be no more rate hikes while the markets are unstable. And the markets immediately rallied because it's impossible for the Bank of Japan to normalize interest rates and the markets remain stable. They're going to be unstable. So what the Bank of Japan is saying is, we'll only raise interest rates if it doesn't destabilize the market. Well, that means they're not going to raise interest rates, because the only way you can raise interest rates is if you destabilize the market. Again, that was the deal they made with the devil going in. They kept interest rates so low for so long that they inflated a massive debt bubble. Well, when you eventually have to normalize rates, you can't do it without pricking that bubble. Well, the markets aren't going to be stable when the air's coming out of a bubble. The markets have to collapse. The economy has to collapse. Everything that was propped up by artificially low interest rates collapses when artificially low interest rates go back up. It's going to happen in Japan, happen in Europe, happen in the United States. All these central banks did the same thing. And they're all in the same no-win predicament. And what happened in Japan is going to happen here. In fact, it already is happening. I mean, that's why Powell stopped hiking. But that's why they're going to cut. They're going to go back to quantitative easing, because you can't normalize rates anywhere, whether it's Japan or the United States, without destabilizing markets, without huge declines in asset prices, without a massive recession. It's not just a soft landing. That's impossible, right? It has to be a crash. And governments are going to have to deal with the consequences of being forced to slash government spending, because the reason they were able to spend so much in the past was because rates were really low and they can keep on borrowing. Well, if rates have to go up because all the inflation that they created to enable that, right now those chickens are coming home to roost, and now they have to raise rates because otherwise we have hyperinflation. So now they have to raise rates. Well, now all that spending that was enabled by low rates has to go away. The governments have to cut. But none of these politicians want to tell anybody that they're going to cut. Look, Trump and Harris they're both saying, we're not going to touch Social Security. No one's going to cut Social Security. No one's going to cut anything. Nobody wants to talk about cutting any government spending. Well, the reason we didn't have to cut it in the past was because the Fed had it covered with low interest rates, so we can keep on borrowing. And so there was no reason to cut. Remember what Janet Yellen was saying, even as Secretary of Treasury? Why should we worry about the debt? Interest rates are so low, right? Just keep on borrowing, right? Well, they weren't going to stay low. I don't know why she didn't get that. I did. I criticized her for those comments, but the world did that. Rates were cheap, so we borrowed. And let's not even concern ourselves with what might happen eventually when rates go up and we have to repay what we borrowed, or we have to cut back on the spending. But what we ended up getting was Japan riding to the rescue and saving the day. Now, the fact that gold didn't just take off, it's just amazing. This was such a bullish announcement that the Bank of Japan has already surrendered on its rate hikes, and it's barely above zero. The Fed is also surrendering. They're going to start cutting. But inflation is going to take off just as the economy is officially entering recession, even though we've unofficially been in it for some time. You can't imagine a more bullish environment for gold, for the mining stocks. Yet gold was down last week. In the face of this, mining stocks were down. So this is just a great opportunity. You know, the dollar ended the week flat. It closed last week on a 4-month low. So the dollar didn't really bounce from there, but it is getting ready to roll over when the Fed, starts to cut, even before it cuts. And it's not just going to cut; it's going back to QE. Nobody is talking about that, but that is what's going to happen because rate cuts aren't going to do it. They're not going to be enough, right? Quantitative easing is going to be required, and an even larger dose than before. So the balance sheet is about to go ballistic. So gold should be rising. And so this is an opportunity not just to buy the metals, to buy the physical gold and silver, which you should be buying. You should give the guys over at Shift Gold a call. And by the way, you don't even have to call now. We have a new website. If you haven't been to the Shift Gold website, it's got a shopping cart. We're going to be improving it with more payment methods, but you can go online. You can fill up your cart with gold and silver coins, check out, and that's it. You don't even have to talk to anybody, right? Not that, we have great people that you can talk to, but, you can go in the middle of the night and you can place your order. There's live quotes and you could buy real time with a live gold and silver price. So you should do that, but you should also be gobbling up these mining stocks. Again, that's where, most of my personal money is. Half my personal portfolio is in gold and silver mining stocks. I expect those stocks to just explode. I think the upside potential is enormous, not just 5 or 10 baggers, but bigger than that. Of course, there's risk, right? I mean, I've thought this for a while, but the setup is perfect. The fundamentals are perfect, and nobody is playing this trade. The hedge funds aren't there, institutions, retail, nobody talks about it, even though it should be, right? Even though gold's at 2430-ish, it's right near a record high. It's barely below its record high. Yet it's a contrarian investment to be bullish. That's how bearish everybody is. So it's just, to me, it's the best opportunity I've seen. So you should be buying these stocks. The Euro Pacific Gold Fund, you could buy it no load at Fidelity, Schwab, any of the big discount brokerage firms, or go to Europac.com and talk to my representatives about how to get into our fund, how to get into our separately managed accounts where we manage a portfolio. And also the shift, my value fund now it's in the top, I think it's in the top 10%. I forget, maybe 6% year to date. But a month ago, it was near the bottom of the pack year to date. Now it's almost at the top as we're shifting into value out of all the momentum stocks that I don't own. So the strategies are really coming into play. But what's going to kick them into a higher gear is going to be the weakness in the dollar. Once the dollar really rolls over, it's a whole new ball game when it comes to international investing. And the dollar decline is way overdue, just like the gold breakout. And even though gold has moved up, right, we have hit new record highs, nobody's cared. Nobody's paid attention. And most of these gold stocks, now some of the gold stocks hit 52-week highs last week and then got slammed on that big drop on Monday. But again, I think that was just frustration because they couldn't push gold above 2,500. Well, once it gets above 2,500, it may never look back to 2,500, right? Because they just may bid it and it'll run away, given where we are right now. So anyway, I want to move along here and talk a little politics, because a lot of stuff has been happening politically. First of all, Harris made her pick for VP, and she picked Tim Walz, who is the governor of Minnesota. And I think Trump dodged another bullet with this pick, because I thought that she was going to pick Josh Shapiro, who is another governor, but out of Pennsylvania. See, Pennsylvania is a key state. Pennsylvania is the 4th biggest electoral state, and it's a swing state. Could go either way. Had she picked Shapiro, I think she would have won Pennsylvania, and that's big. That could determine the outcome of the race. By the way, according to the polls now, Harris has a bigger lead against Trump than Biden ever did before he lost the lead, which surprised me. I thought Trump, was never going to surrender the lead like that to Harris. But the way the media has been repackaging and rebranding her. I mean, they're lying as much about Harris as they were about Biden. the same people that said Biden is as sharp as a tack, right, and then kick him to the curb as soon as that lie was exposed. Now they got a new lie about how great Kamala Harris is, and as long as she keeps her mouth shut and nobody actually hears her talk, they can keep selling her to the American public like she's the greatest thing. And apparently it's working. Now they haven't even had their convention yet, but she's moved up in the polls. But this pick, I think that says a lot about Harris, because she didn't make the smart political pick. She took Waltz because that's what the radical left-wing base of the Democratic Party wants, because he's about as left-wing as you're going to get. I mean, they're two socialists in a pod there. I mean, Minnesota is like one of the highest taxed states in the country, big government. All the big liberals have come out of, Minnesota, Hubert Humphrey and Walter Mondale. I mean, it's a very liberal state. They haven't gone Republican since Richard Nixon, right? So why go for the governor of Minnesota when you got Minnesota in the bag, right? Harris was going to win Minnesota. It's because that's how liberal she is. She didn't want a guy that was kind of a moderate like Shapiro. But another thing, I think that the Democrats need to reach out to the Jews, because Jews typically vote in mass for Democrats. I think the Democrats may even get a bigger percentage of the Jewish vote than they do of the black vote, right? That's how loyal Jews have been to the Democratic Party. I mean, me as a Jewish Republican libertarian, I could be more rare than a black Republican, right? That's how loyal the Jews have been to the Democrats. Well, that loyalty was called into question with all the anti-Semitism now that's obvious in the Democratic Party. So I thought that this would have been an important outreach if Shapiro would have taken a Jew on the ticket, right? The last time that happened was Lieberman with, and that ticket didn't win. But I thought, okay, this, throw the Jews a bone here and maybe we'll win him back, and he's very pro-Israel. But that may be why they didn't pick him. There's so much anti-Semitism in the Democratic Party that they wouldn't even have a Jew on the ticket. So she had to go with Wall. So, but I think for Trump, that's a good thing, because I think Shapiro would have been a much better pick for her to have made. But I want to talk about a couple of the proposals that have been made by Trump on taxes, because I mentioned before, and I support the idea. Trump came out and said, "Hey, we should have no taxes on tips." Right? If you get a tip, you're a waiter, you're a bartender, you're a dealer in a casino, you're a taxi cab driver, Uber driver, whatever you are. Somebody gives you a tip, there should be no taxes. I agree, there should be no taxes on tips, because I don't think tips are income. I don't think they qualify. I think they're a gift, right? Somebody appreciates what you did and they gave you something. Nobody is required to leave a tip, and it's not your employer. And of course, when your employer pays you wages, your employer gets the tax deduction for the wages he pays you. He subtracts those wages from his own taxes. And so then the government gets to tax the worker because the employer deducted it. But when you leave a tip, you don't get a tax deduction for your tips. I can't deduct the tips that I give people from my own taxes. So the government got income twice. They taxed me when I earned the money, and then they taxed the waiter when I gave him some of what I earned, right? When an employer pays the waiter, there's a deduction that offsets the tax. So it's not a double win. So it makes sense that there should be no taxes on tips, because they're not income. And I don't like the fact that people have to keep track of their tips, because they get tipped in cash. It's a pain in the ass, right? So there shouldn't be any taxes. So now Harris is basically trying to say, oh, I'm in favor of that too. Well, okay, why don't they do that right now? But the problem is, if you eliminate the tax on tips, well, now you got a bigger deficit. What tax are you going to increase because you're no longer taxing tips? Nobody's talking about that, right? Hey, Trump is not saying, I'm going to eliminate the tax on tips. Great. How are you going to make up the lost revenue? It's funny, too, that a lot of the Democrats are saying, well, it would be better if we just raised the minimum wage. Forget about tax-free tips. Just raise the minimum wage. Yeah, that's the worst thing you could do. Haven't they learned that yet from looking at California? If you raise the minimum wage, you're going to put waiters and bartenders out of work. So they're going to get no tips because they're going to have no job. The best thing you could do is have no taxes on tips, right? Then you can get rid of the minimum wage. People won't even want the wage. They'll want all their money in tips, right? If I was a waiter, I would just tell my employer, forget about paying me. I'll work for free. I just want to work for tips. But you probably have to work. You probably have to get the minimum wage. So I would just want the minimum wage, and then I would want everything in tips because it was tax-free. And then the restaurants could lower their prices and just, people would know to give a tip. Now, of course, you're not required to give a tip. So you do run the risk that you get, the customer screws you over. But most people aren't going to screw you over if they know that you're working for tips. They're going to give you a tip. But the thing is, at least on waiter, waitress, you get better service supposedly for a tip. But when you go to a casino in Vegas, you get the same service whether you tip or not. In fact, they call it toking, I think. But you can't give somebody who tips you can't deal them better cards. No, you're going to deal the cards the way the cards are. So you're not going to get better service if you tip at a casino like you may. So it's even less of an income in Vegas. But now you got Kamala Harris supporting it, and now Trump is saying, "Hey, that was my idea." Yeah, well, okay, well, if it's a good idea, but the thing is, it's not a good idea if you don't offset it. People are still talking about cutting taxes when the government is broke. The government needs more tax revenue unless you're going to cut spending. Now, of course, I prefer to cut spending, but no one's talking about doing that. Now, another thing that Trump's been talking about is no taxes on Social Security benefits, which, Social Security is already broke. So if you take away the taxes, it's going to be even more broke, right? You're basically, because at least with Social Security taxes, the people who get the benefits are giving some of the benefits back. So it's like having your benefits cut, which is what we need. But the problem is the taxes on Social Security benefits are a bad idea economically because they disincentivize people who might otherwise work from working. Because if I am going to pay taxes on my Social Security benefits that I would not pay taxes on if I didn't work, and then I work and I pay taxes, it's double tax. So there is a huge tax incentive if you're retired not to work. Because if I work, I'm not only going to pay income taxes on what I earn, but I'm going to lose money on the Social Security benefits that I would have got. So the marginal tax rate is much higher. See, it's not just what you pay in taxes, but what you lose in Social Security benefits. So it's bad. We should get rid of the tax on Social Security benefits, but you can't do that in the vacuum. You've got to find a way to cut benefits because that's better than punishing people who go out and work because you don't want to discourage people who might work from working. So the best way to do it is eliminate the taxes on the benefits, but then lower the benefits. Then you get rid of the disincentive. That's what has to be done. No one wants to talk about it. Now, the best way to go about it is a means test, but not based on your income that you earn working, right? Because you don't want to discourage people from working. So it has to be on unearned income. So if you're going to use income, it should be dividend income, interest income. So somebody that's earning millions of dollars a year in interest on his muni bonds, that person can have a reduction in their Social Security benefits because they have a lot of income that they didn't go out and work. You don't want to discourage people from earning income because that's productive. We need people in the economy working, and we don't want to create incentives not to work. But if you're rich and you're just clipping coupons, then why are you getting all these Social Security benefits when the money to pay those benefits is coming from young people who are a lot less well off than you are? I mean, Social Security really amounts to a transfer in most cases from the young and the poor to the old and the rich. So we have to stop that because the system is broke. The chain letter has run out of chain, and we have to accept that. But none of the candidates, even Donald Trump, I'm not going to touch Social Security. I'm not even going to lower the retirement age. And I'm going to cut taxes on the benefits. So he's going to take an insolvent system and make it even more insolvent without any attempt to do anything to fix the problem. Now, the problem is really unfixable because you can't fix a Ponzi scheme. You can't make a Ponzi scheme work. What you can do is recognize that it's a Ponzi scheme and try to figure out a way to repair the damage that you've done, right? And then going forward, we got to get rid of Social Security completely going forward. We got to find a way to phase it out. I mean, it was unconstitutional anyway. But then we got to figure out how do we take care of all these people who are broke because they paid all these taxes and they thought they were going to get all these benefits that don't exist. But one way to do it is not to give the money to people who don't need it because they're rich. And it has to be based on assets and investment income, not going out and earning a job. So I should, for example, should get no Social Security. Yes, I paid a lot of Social Security taxes in my life, but I don't need the money, and so I shouldn't get anything. And that would let some young people off the hook from having to pay the price. And not only does Social Security take money from the young and the poor and give it to the old and the rich, it takes money from young people who are poor and gives it to young people who are inheriting money from their rich parents. Because if I've got a lot of money and then I get Social Security benefits, well, I can spend those Social Security benefits instead of spending my retirement money. And then when I die, I have an inheritance for my kids. Well, where did that money come from? It came from younger people who are not inheriting anything from their parents. So why should young people who are not going to inherit a nickel pay taxes so that other young people can inherit a bunch of money? Doesn't make any sense. So you should have to spend your savings rather than give them to your kids and lose your Social Security and take care of yourself, right? And so there's so many reforms that have to be made. But the point I was mainly trying to make here is that Trump is not even talking about any ways to cut spending, but more ways to grow the deficits, right? Because by cutting taxes on tips, cutting taxes on Social Security, you increase the deficits, which are going to increase anyway because of the rising costs of servicing the debt and because of the skyrocketing costs of Social Security and Medicare, which are going to skyrocket even faster if these plans are adopted anyway. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about what's going on in the UK, political-wise, politics. Because over there, I mean, that's, maybe a harbinger of things to come. But in response to a lot of the unrest and the protests and the riots, the UK government is really clamping down on freedom of speech. And I'm not an expert. I mean, I know a lot about the US Constitution and the freedom of speech that we enjoy here. I'm not really sure to what extent free speech is protected in the UK. But they really don't have free speech at all. And that should, be a big problem, because, you want to look at a lot of oppressive countries around the world that you want to criticize. And one of the most fundamental rights is freedom of expression, free speech. And you don't have it in the UK right now. They have this law. I'm reading it, Section 127 of the Communications Act. I copied it. This is what the act reads. This would be unconstitutional on its face if they had an act like this in the United States. But here's what it reads. It says that it's an offense to send public messages. And, they're targeting X, right? What used to be Twitter or also Facebook, right? If you repost something, right, you're going to fall within the language of this law. So it says it's an offense to send public messages of a quote grossly offensive or of an indecent, obscene, or menacing character. Right? That's it. It's a crime. You go to jail for doing this. Basically, this is hate speech. If you say something that somebody is offended by, right? You've hurt somebody's feelings, right? That's a crime. Well, how could that possibly be a crime? And clearly, if you're not allowed to be offensive, if you're not allowed to hurt other people's feelings, then you don't have freedom of speech. Well, then what do you have? I mean, the whole concept of free speech is that you have to defend the rights of people to say things that you disagree with, that may be offensive to you, that may be hateful. Because the minute you let the government decide, they're the arbiter, the government can decide what is offensive, what is hateful. Well, then they can make anything they want hateful or offensive. I remember when I was a little kid, my parents said, if other kids call you names, sticks and stones can break your bones, but names will never hurt you. Well, apparently that's not true anymore, right? We can't handle getting called a name. Hate is not a crime. If you live in a free society, which obviously the UK is not, right? They're not free. But if you live in a free society, you're free to hate whoever you want, right? I mean, I hear all the people on the left talking about you can love who you want. Right? Oh, the Republicans are bad because they won't let people love who they want to love, which is not true. But they want to make a big deal about why everybody has the right to love who they want to love. And I agree, love whoever you want. But it applies to hate too. If you have the right to love who you want to love, you can hate who you want to hate. And you can express your hatred however you want. Now, what you can't do is be violent. See, there's a big difference between inciting violence and just announcing your hatred, right? So if I want to say I hate Jews and I happen to be Jewish, right? So I guess I can say that. But if I want to hate Jews and I want to publicly say, yeah, I hate those Jews, that's fine. I can say that all I want. What I can't say is, I hate Jews. Go kill Jews. In fact, if you see a Jew on the street, take out a knife or a gun, whatever you have, and just kill him right now. Just go do it, or, that's violence, right? And so that's wrong, right? You can't incite somebody to go out and commit a violent act against somebody else. But if I just want to talk about how much I hate somebody without encouraging violence, I'm just expressing my views, how I feel about something. I have a right to do it. And of course, I can say things that are offensive. I mean, a lot of the things I believe in offend other people. When I say I think we should have no minimum wage, people get offended by that. Oh, that's so offensive, right? I mean, look at all the things that people get offended with now over gender. You misgender somebody and they get offended. Oh, so I'm supposed to go to jail for something like that because I offended somebody? In a free society, you're going to get offended. I mean, that's just life, right? You have to be willing to accept, right? There's a saying, I may disagree with what you say, but I will defend your right to say it. Well, I may be offended by what you say, but I'll defend your right to say. There's a lot of art that people think is offensive. So what? You can go to jail because your art is offensive because somebody there's always somebody that can take offense. How the hell do you know? You can say something totally innocent. You may not even mean to offend somebody, and you offend them. So none of this can ever be a crime, right? Thinking about something can't be a crime. You can't be imprisoned for what you think, for what you believe, for what you feel. And no matter how stupid those beliefs may be, no matter how offensive it may be, or how mean-spirited, if that's what you think, that's what you think. And you have a right to express yourself. And other people, they can react the way they want to react. And again, if somebody says hateful things, you can't go and beat them up, right? You've got to be tolerant. That is that. And I've been talking about this now for years, right? Because the left And this is, you just have a big left-wing government now in the UK. Labour Party had this major victory, right? The left wants to talk about how they're so tolerant and how, the right is intolerant. It's the left that's intolerant because they can't tolerate intolerance. That's the measure of how tolerant you are. It's how you're able to tolerate people who disagree with you, but they want to silence the opinions, right? You can't repost a post. If somebody posts something on X that offends somebody, that's a crime. If you repost it, well, you're a criminal too. Now, they want to shut down any opinion, right? That they don't like. It's not like the opinions are hateful. They just hate the opinion because they can define whatever they want. So you're giving all this power to the government to control the population and to imprison people who say things they don't like. And again, what happens? Everybody just assumes that the government is good. The government is benevolent. Governments are inherently corrupt. There's way more corruption. There's way more dishonesty in government than there is in the private sector. Some of the most dishonest people are the ones that end up working for government. I don't know why people don't understand that. And it's so much worse when dishonest people are in positions of power because they can use that power in very oppressive ways. If somebody is dishonest in the private sector, they really can't harm me. I mean, unless they can steal, right? They can take a gun and rob. But apart from that, if you're just a dishonest businessman, I don't have to buy your products. I don't have to work for your company. I don't have to engage with you at all if I don't want to. And you can't force me to buy your products or work for your company. But when you get these dishonest politicians, government officials, they have the force of law. They have the guns. They can force you to do stuff. And they can cover up their crimes because they're in charge of the police. They're in charge of the courts, right? So if you're a private sector and you do something wrong, it's more likely you're going to get caught. If you're in the government, you do something wrong, you're more likely to get away with it, right? Look what happened to my bank, right? So this is very dangerous when you have the government like that. But once the government can control your speech and decide what speech is criminal and what speech is not based on an arbitrary standard of what they find offensive or indecent or obscene or mean, right? Menacing or mean. I mean, once you do that, what happens if you get a very corrupt government that is overtly oppressing the people in a totalitarian way, in a way that you'd want to have a revolution, you'd want to have some kind of movement to try to overthrow it, right, in the population. But now you can't because anybody who criticizes the regime gets thrown in jail. Like we see that, we can criticize that if it happens in Cuba or North Korea or any communist country, right? You can't criticize the government because you can get thrown in jail. Well, do we want the same kind of laws here? Is the United Kingdom, are you willing to accept that you've got the same type of laws as you might find in North Korea or Cuba where you can't criticize the government, right? It's a crime to say things that the government decides are offensive or hateful. No, this is the slope that they're going down. And it's a dangerous precedent because other countries could follow in the same direction. And they're doing all this in the name of tolerance. You can't say bad things about other people. Sure, you can. Now, what they should do is just allow people to say whatever hateful things they want. They talk about disinformation, right? Well, even what was I saw a clip of Tim Walz on freedom of speech. As well, you can't be free to give out disinformation. Sure, you can. You can give out any information you want, because you can't let the government decide what information is disinformation and what information is accurate, because they can decide that accurate information is disinformation to suppress it. So the way you deal with disinformation is not to suppress it, but to allow it and then contradict it with the facts. You have an argument in a public forum. If somebody is putting out misinformation, then you counter that by putting out the correct information. You don't silence the misinformation. Say, oh, we can't let anybody hear that. No, let people hear it, and then you can say why it's wrong, right? That is how it's done in a free society. But when you have government suppressing what it considers to be misinformation, what it considers to be hateful, or any kind of speech, you have to combat it by telling the truth. If some people want to say, "Oh, I hate Jews," well, other people can say, "Well, that's a horrible opinion," right? And talk about the virtues of Jews and why Jews are good people, right? We don't have to stop somebody from saying bad things. We just say good things, right? And we just win the argument in public. We don't have to hide from it. We don't have to silence it. When you want to silence somebody from saying something, it's probably because you don't have the ability to win the argument. They're probably right. And so your only solution is to stop them from speaking so you don't have to deal with it. You don't have to prove that they're wrong because you can't. So you just prevent them from talking so nobody can hear the truth and you can continue to perpetuate a lie. So the people in the UK should be fighting back against these laws, fighting back against any government that would, write laws like this, any politicians that would vote to enact laws like this. And we should do whatever we can here in the United States to make sure that our freedom of speech is not abridged to the degree that they're doing in the UK, but any more than it is. And we already have this big movement here to silence people in social media, to cancel people if they say things that are offensive or we don't believe in. And even though the private sector may have a right to do that, right? If you're a private, if I own a search engine or I own Facebook, and I want to say, hey, I'm not going to allow certain speech on Facebook. All right, it's a private company. It's not the government, right? It's not censorship. But in many ways, the way these companies are working with the government, it ends up being a de facto censorship when the government is behind it, or when the companies and government are working in cooperation with one another. Now, fortunately, Elon Musk bought Twitter and liberated it from that, because it was really captured by the government, and the government was using the relationships it had with these companies to censor speech on these forums, right? And so now that's starting to break away. Now you're seeing, like I read stories about how they're threatening in the UK to arrest Elon Musk. I mean, he's like public enemy number one over there because he's enabling free speech that they're trying to suppress. Anyway, that's it for today's podcast. Again, I'm back here in Puerto Rico. I'm back at work, and I'm looking forward to doing a lot more podcasts in the weeks and months ahead. Again, if you enjoy the podcast, don't forget to like it, put a comment. And if you're not following me on X, make sure and do that, because based on how popular that last Spaces was, I'll probably be doing a lot more of those in the future. So bye for now.